This is your second appearance with us. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
If the states amended the Constitution to get rid of the First Amendment, would we still have freedom of speech?
Well, of course. I mean, we can never lose any of our inalienable rights, and the only question is, will we have a system of laws that are going to protect them adequately or not? The Constitution is great. I've always said the Constitution's not the last word, the natural law is.
When Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, I emphasize creator and inalienable, he wedded the American soul to the concept of the natural law, that our rights come from our humanity. So if our rights come from our humanity, if my right to speak freely and your right to disagree with me is as natural as the fingers on the ends of our hands, and if the framers recognized that when they wrote in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, I emphasize the because I think that reflects their understanding that freedom of speech preceded the existence of the country. How can Congress write laws that can punish us for speech?
Right, and you know, one of the reasons I wrote my book was to try and get across to the readers that there is an underlying principle here, the natural law that precedes all government. And we talk, and the arguments now are so far from that that we start to talk about our Second Amendment rights, our constitutional rights, our First Amendment right to free speech. I don't like those terms because what we have in the Constitution are protections. We have a First Amendment protection, as you say, of the right to free speech, which pre-exists the government.
When people say that the right to speak freely comes from the Constitution, how wrong are they?
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to the philosophy. I think you hit the nail on the head. Our founders made a choice. You know, there were other philosophies available for them to base our nation on. And I mentioned a few of them in a couple articles I've written. There was the philosophy of Hobbes, who said that we had to give up all of our natural rights to an absolute monarch for the security that absolute monarch could give us back and protect us from violent death. And then there was Rousseau, who said that we had to subordinate our rights to this general will, which I don't think he ever really defined. And then there was Locke, who said that, no, you enter society to protect your rights.
Right, and you have Aquinas, Augustine, Aristotle, I'm going in reverse history, Clarence Thomas, Martin Luther King, a number of people who said our rights come from our humanity. The government doesn't give us the rights. The government's obligation is to protect those rights.
Correct. And it says in the Declaration of Independence, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So there is no mistake about which philosophy we based our country on when we started it. I think that there was a very definite shift at the turn of the last century where we said the purpose of government is no longer to secure our rights, but instead is now to create economic equality, to spread democracy throughout the world, make the world safe for democracy, and that can only be done at the expense of the individual's rights.
Look, if you have no natural rights, no respect for natural rights, democracy could be two wolves and a sheep voting on dinner.
Sure.
Guess who's going to become dinner if there's no natural rights to protect the sheep, which is my objection to the notion that military force alone can inculcate democracy, because just a simple majority vote is only the tip of the iceberg of democracy. Democracy really means that the individual is greater than the state, that the majority can't take away the individual's rights unless the individual has assaulted somebody else's natural rights.
Yeah, you know, it really surprises me that the Republican Party uses the word democracy so much to describe the United States, because they could say republic, which would be good branding for them. And there is a very key difference. You know, Madison called democracy the most vile form of government. And the founders were very afraid of democracy unfettered.
Because they thought it would be mob rule. They thought it would be two wolves voting to have the sheep for dinner.
Correct.
You know, Lawrence Tribe, who is not a favorite of conservatives, but is a constitutional scholar at Harvard, does understand the natural law when he said it is the role of judges to enforce the natural law. They are the anti-democratic branch of the government. They prevent the tyranny of the majority. They prevent the wolves voting to have the sheep for dinner. So we have to have natural rights respected by the government. And if the government won't respect the natural rights, we have to expect courts to do it for us.
Yeah, and I don't think that, our founders were too optimistic that would, of course, Jefferson said every generation we'd have to have a revolution. And hopefully we've come to a point as human beings where we can have an intellectual revolution and have a war of ideas. And I think that, the time is ripe for something like that right now.
We're chatting with Tom Mullen, who's the author of A Return to Common Sense, Reawakening Liberty in the Inhabitants of America. Are these arguments that you and I and Jesse Kelly make, and that most of the good folks watching and listening to us now, that the individual is greater than the state, that we have natural rights that the state can't take away? Are these just theoretical arguments? Are they a hopeless case, or will they one day resonate with Americans, as they did in 1776 and again in 1789?
Well, I think that one of the things, the regular people, regular folks like myself, which is what I am, know what is right and what is wrong. And I think deep down, that's why Barry Goldwater used that slogan, "In your heart, you know he's right," because I think everybody does. And I think that the power of the political machine can overpower them sometimes. I don't think most people want to take from somebody else to buy themselves health care. They'd like to buy it themselves, but they feel like they have no choice.
Let me bring Jesse Kelly back into the conversation. Jesse, who was with us a few minutes ago, is running for Congress in Arizona's 8th District. Tom mentions, of course, the name of the greatest Arizonan, Barry Goldwater. I ask you the same question. Are these arguments that our rights are natural, that government should be small and individual liberty should be at its maximum extent, do these arguments resonate with people? Or are there people out there, like I hear on my radio show, who want the government to take care of them?
There are people that want the government to take care of them. And natural rights are under attack right now. There's no question about it. They're under assault by the government, by the radical left, but it still resonates. It's still, if there are enough people to make the argument, like you do on your radio show, like you do here on Freedom Watch, like people do every single day, all that you need to do is explain to people why limited government matters, why free market capitalism is the only system where men can truly be free. Then they'll understand.
Tom Mullen, how do you make the argument that freedom is a greater good than a loaf of bread?
Well, what I try to do in my talks, and I do go back to the philosophers, but I say, look, the definition of liberty at its base is non-aggression, and most people agree with that. And they've forgotten that the government, when they do something, is really backing up what they do with force. And it's so bureaucratic now and so multi-layered that I think people forget that when they cast a vote, they're saying, you must do this or we will commit violence against you. And when you finally get them to make that connection, suddenly they're all libertarians.
Do people pay 40, or here in New York City and New York State, 50% taxes because they think they have a moral obligation to do so? Or do they do it because the government will come with guns and take you away if you don't?